The entire game was completely turned upside down by Camron. Jim Jones quietly left after the shocking release, leaving Chrissy frantically searching for explanations. Fans are in disbelief. The repercussions may be the most intense yet, and the streets are humming. Let's examine what actually transpired. Harlem streets were bustling, but not for the typical reasons. It wasn't about a rap feud leaking onto the block, a new mixtape release, or even a fashion statement. This time, the murmurs, side glances, and whispers were all focused on Camron, a guy who had made a name for himself not only through his skill and style as a lyricist but also through his unafraid ability to say what others wouldn't. Additionally, everything Camron chose to release into the public was explosive and never merely rumors. His leak this time wasn't merely a light-hearted remark about the sector. It was intimate, it was cruel, and it broke Chrissy Lampkin's world so completely that Jim Jones couldn't ignore the harm. The industry was rocked by what Camron disclosed. Jim Jones and the Harlem rapper, who is renowned for his frigid delivery and diplomatic legacy, had a rocky relationship from the beginning. They had established an empire. Together, they had seen that empire fall apart over the years due to egos, financial conflicts, and loyalty concerns. They attempted to mend the wounds, but they were never completely healed. Therefore, Cam's bombshell release wasn't an isolated incident. It was calculated. It was similar to exposing a wound. That didn't close. There was more to the leak than a cryptic Instagram live comment or a diss track. Cam's disclosure of concrete proof, audio and video receipts thrust Chrissy into the public eye in the most worst way imaginable. According to reports, the video captured Chrissy in awkward circumstances, times that totally contradicted the persona she had devoted so much of her time to creating on Love and Hip Hop. Chrissy had been this strong, naive woman who stood by Jim for years, fighting for their relationship, for her own independence, and for the respect of Jim's mother, Mama Jones. However, what was revealed a different tale. One where Chrissy had secrets of her own and wasn't the victim. The internet went viral right away. Fans who had spent more than 10 years following Jim and Chrissy's story were taken aback. In a matter of hours, memes began to spread. Instagram and gossip blogs had a field day. Comment sections become full-fledged battlefields. There was mayhem between Team Chrissy, Team Jim, and Team Kemet. Some individuals sympathized with Chrissy, claiming that Cam had gone too far and broken the bro code by making his private affairs public. Some contended that Chrissy was due, that she had spent too much time playing a risky game in the spotlight. Karma had now at last caught up. However, Chrissy wasn't the one who was struck the hardest. Jim Jones was the one. Jim had stood up for Chrissy against the world for years. He was standing by her after their relationship was openly condemned by Mama Jones. He had made an effort to strike a balance between his devotion to his girlfriend and his Dipset brothers. In order to demonstrate that Chrissy was his rock and ride door, he had given up friendships and economic prospects. However, in light of Cam's revelation, Jim was in the worst situation he had ever been in. In addition to his brother-in-arms revealing his lady, the whole business was observing his reaction. Would he finally leave the relationship he had worked so hard to keep, or would he defend Chrissy once more, even if the evidence appeared to be against him? It was chaotic behind the scenes. According to others close to the marriage, there was a lot of conflict at Jim and Chrissy's house. Chrissy reportedly sobbed as she insisted that Cam's disclosure was fake, exaggerated, or out of context. She pleaded with Jim to keep Camron's what they had created is destroyed by resentment. This time, however, Jim was not readily persuaded. He had been in circumstances for years when his devotion to Chrissy cost him relationships with other people. Cam is now using their private life as a weapon. Jim couldn't get rid of the thought that perhaps, just possibly, his lifelong partner had exposed him to humiliation. Camron, meanwhile, remained composed. He made jokes, left hidden messages, and implied that if someone attempted to approach him from the side, He had even more to reveal on social media. Cam was always like that. Never give up, never be weak, and never allow who controls the story. The reason he initially leaked the information was a topic of much discussion among fans. Was it retaliation for long-standing grievances? Was it because Jim and Cam had attempted to get back together but had drifted apart again? Or was it just Cam being Cam, who thrives on controversy and mayhem? However, the effect was indisputable. It was impossible for Jim Jones to leave the house without hearing rumors about Chrissy. The mood changed even at industry gatherings. He was now seen as Harlem royalty by those who had previously viewed him as such. The person who says, "Hey, is what Cam stated accurate?" Jim's pride was hurt, and he wasn't the type of man who tolerated rudeness, particularly not in front of everyone. When the cameras weren't filming, Jim and Chrissy's tension reached a breaking point. Lengthy silences became arguments, and lengthy silences became frigid distance. According to reports, Jim began staying out more frequently, taking care of old acquaintances, and wondering if the woman he had dedicated almost 20 years of his life to was truly worth the turmoil. Chrissy felt deceived not only by Camron but also by Jim's hesitancy. For many years, she had battled to demonstrate her allegiance. Everything appeared to be undone with a single spill. Admirers who had grown up with hip-hop and love couldn't believe what they were witnessing. This was no longer merely a drama on reality TV. It was unvarnished, unadulterated existence. Chrissy had always hoped for a happily ever after with Jim, complete with marriage. For the first time, however, Jim didn't simply argue back. Instead, he left, making that fantasy appear even more improbable. That's what insiders said anyway. Following the disclosure, Jim refused to take Chrissy's calls and apparently left their house for a few days. In times like this, silence was more powerful than words, and the guy who had previously stood up for her in front of his mother, his friends, and the whole hip-hop industry was suddenly silent. The relationship's foundation had been more than just humiliated by the disclosure. Been brittle already. The relationship between Jim and Chrissy is now irreparable, but the one between Jim and Cam was irreparable. Fans wondered if this was the last straw for Chrissy and Jim, while the industry in Harlem watched. Oh, or would they somehow start over the way they always had? It was obvious. Camron's startling disclosure was more than simply a story. It was a pivotal moment, an instance where pride, loyalty, and love clashed in the most visible way imaginable. And the world realized that this narrative was far from over as Jim Jones left. From above, Harlem was mistaken if they believed that Camon's leak was the storm's climax. The drama was just getting started. The leak itself was the first part of this story, unavoidable and impolite. Part 2, however, dealt with the fallout, the reactions, and the aftermath that extended well beyond Jim, Chrissy, and Cam. Three persons was no longer the only issue here. It turned into a show, a headline that attracted the attention of Mama Jones. Millions of admirers who had been emotionally immersed in Jim and Chrissy's tale for more than 10 years, as well as industry peers. Mama Jones caused the initial reverberation. Anyone who has seen hip-hop and love, she was aware that she had never been Chrissy's strongest ally. Mama Jones believed Chrissy was controlling her son, manipulating him, and causing a rift between him and his family from the start. Mama Jones even released a diss track about Chrissy at one time, and their fights were legendary. Thus, when Cam revealed the secret, Mama Jones didn't mince words. Mama Jones lost her mind on Instagram Live. Although she didn't specifically mention Chrissy, it was clear from her statements who she was referring to. For years, some people have been donning masks. They love what comes with you, even though you believe they love you. The truth is always revealed. And don't cry when it does, sweetie. Fans immediately inundated the comments with new Mama Jones comments, smiling faces, and fire emojis. It was a dagger to Chrissy's chest. Not only was her personal information made public, but her boyfriend's, her harshest critic, mother, was now reveling in her demise. Jim Jones, however, was unusually silent in public. Jim has a reputation for standing up for Chrissy no matter what for years. However, his silence was deafening after the leak. His next move was the subject of fan speculation. Would he return Camron's clap? As usual, would he issue a statement defending Chrissy? Or had he finally been so broken by Cam that he no longer had the strength to defend his relationship? Insiders said Jim was conflicted behind the scenes. He loved Chrissy on the one hand. Profoundly, she was more than simply a romantic partner. He had established his life with her as a companion. She had kept him afloat during difficult financial times, at the highs and lows of his career, and when everyone else seemed to abandon him. However, he was unable to ignore what Cam had revealed to the world. It was no longer important whether it was entirely factual, twisted, or exaggerated. The damage was already done. Public humiliation has now entangled Jim's reputation, pride, and image as Harlem's capo. Humiliated in public. Humiliation. Additionally, Camron performed the villainous part with ease. Cam always added cryptic messages, laughing emojis, or lines that seemed to jab at Jim's manhood whenever blogs wrote about the subject. He commented, "Don't get mad at me. I ain't doing it. I just hit play," beneath one of his widely shared entries. While some applauded Cam for going too far, others said, "Fans ate it up." Even people who weren't Team Chrissy admitted that some things shouldn't be aired out, especially when they could destroy families. That said, eventually, the tension overflowed into spheres of industry. Jim appeared to be exhausted during a recent event in New York. He wasn't his typical gregarious self, according to witnesses. He avoided interviews, stayed out of the spotlight, and hardly smiled. Jim usually flourished in the limelight, but now he appeared to be a man who had lost weight, down through treachery. There were even rumors that Jim left the conversation midway, when someone attempted to mention Kay's name. The humiliation was even more painful for Chrissy. Every moment of Cam's leak was examined by blogs, making her the hot subject for all the wrong reasons. She was unable to avoid the press. It caught Chrissy slipping. Jim's Lady Harlem romance is revealed by Camron in flames. Even those who formerly admired her fortitude and tenacity in hip-hop and love were now wondering if she had been involved at home all along. The arguments became more heated. Jim was accused by Chrissy of leaving her when she needed him. She thought he was giving Crone the upper hand and allowing his ex-boyfriend to control the course of their relationship. But Jim had a different perspective. Chrissy had left an opening because Cam even had something to spill. A gap that was now being exploited to publicly degrade him. You have no idea what it's like to go outside and be met by blank stares from everyone. During one heated argument, Jim reportedly lost his temper. Chrissy had maintained her loyalty for years, so those statements were particularly hurtful. Even Jim now doubted it. Even producers of Hip Hop and Love were affected. Word got out that VH1 was rushing to choose whether or not to use this real-life issue in the upcoming season's plot. Drama is what reality TV is all about, and Camron's leak was perfect. However, Jim had no interest. According to others close to him, he didn't want anything to do with cameras at the time. There was no story in life. In front of millions, line was a nightmare come true. However, fans were unable to resist speculating about Instagram and Twitter. There were heated arguments. Some blamed Cam, claiming that he took it out on Chrissy because he was resentful of old Dipset grudges. Chrissy was blamed by others who claimed that her past had finally come up with her. And a startling percentage pointed the finger upon Jim, claiming he ought to have realized better than to put his faith in either Chrissy or Cam. Entirely. The one subject on which everyone was in agreement. In the Jim and Chrissy story, this was the most dramatic chapter to date. They had fought, cried, split up, and reconciled on television, but this time seemed different. The suffering wasn't merely a plot point this time. It was authentic. Additionally, Jim's quiet and his reluctance to immediately defend Chrissy gave many people the impression that the relationship might be coming to an end. Rumors circulated that Jim was relying on people outside of his relationship network and spending more time with former Dipset associates. There were even rumors that Jim was thinking about severing all contact with Chrissy and leaving after almost 20 years of turbulence. He's worn out. He made too many sacrifices for too long, according to one insider. The final straw was this leak. Chrissy, however, was not going to let go that lightly, in spite of the shame, but she was still certain that she and Jim could overcome the conflict. She wasn't going to let Curran be the reason she broke up with him because she had been with him through thick and thin. "We've been through worse," she allegedly said to a pal. However, had they truly experienced more? Or was this the type of betrayal that could a romance last until the end of the week? It was obvious. Jim was getting farther away. Camron was relishing every moment of the mayhem he had let loose, and Chrissy's desperation was evident. There was division in Harlem. The internet was split. Popcorn in hand, the business watched. The question that pervaded everything was straightforward yet cruel. Would Jim Jones eventually interrupt Chrissy, or would he support her through her humiliation once more? The response was unclear. Not yet. However, one thing was for sure. It was not the end of the story. One thing was clear by the time the dust settled around Camron's leak. Jim Jones and Chrissy Lampkin would never be the same. The pair that had previously once regarded as the epitome of hip-hop devotion, they were now in jeopardy. Their personal conflicts were publicized on all blogs, podcasts, and gossip sites. And the noise around Jim increased in volume while he remained mute. Jim was battling his feelings behind closed doors after spending years of burial. He had sacrificed friendships, professional advancement, and occasionally even his pride for Chrissy's happiness for so long. However, Camron had to confront a hard reality as a result of his disclosure. Perhaps loyalty was insufficient on its own. Perhaps love, however, when the world was waiting for you to fail all the time, it was impossible to survive. Chrissy, however, was not about to concede defeat. She was aware of the harsh nature of the internet, and that Cam had achieved a significant victory by smearing her name. Jim's silence was more painful than the leak, though. For decades, she had seen him take charge, stand up for her, and make everyone respect her. But this time she felt deserted. She no longer only battled Mama Jones, Camron, and the press. She was battling the man she believed would be by her side no matter what. The rupture, the turning point, was when Jim arrived home one evening after being gone for several days. As soon as he entered, Chrissy addressed him, her voice shaking with anger and grief. "After everything we've been through together, do you really think you can just leave me?" She made a demand. Jim shook his head and dropped his keys on the table, clearly fatigued. "It's not about leaving. It's about recognizing what is and is not real." Chrissy was more deeply hurt by those statements than by Cam's whole spill. She had battled for Jim's rights for years. Dedication, even popping the question on love and hip-hop. She thought their love was unbreakable despite all the ups and downs. However, Jim was now doubting the basis of their relationship itself. Jim was rumored to be thinking about permanently leaving, and insiders stated that he had already been remaining away from the commotion in a different location in Harlem. Chrissy thought this was a rerun of the past. Every time she believed marriage was imminent, they were ripped away by something. Camron's leak, Mama Jones, or business conflicts. The wound felt too deep this time to recover. Cam continued to stoke the fire in the meanwhile. His admirers encouraged him as he made fun of Jim's lack of speak on Instagram Live, saying things like, "Funny how the loudest ones always go mute when the truth come out." He didn't specifically identify Jim or Chrissy, but everyone knew who he was referring to. Even Dipset fans were divided, with some accusing him of being Killer Cam, the truth teller, and others of ruining a relationship to settle old grudges. Some believed Cam had betrayed the brotherhood by bringing Jim's personal life into the spotlight, while others contended that Jim had previously chosen Chrissy over the crew and that this was just karma. Cam had entirely changed the story. Alright, so Jim and Chrissy were left to pick up the pieces. For Chrissy, the humiliation was too much, and friends disclosed that she stopped going out. Regardless of perspectives, one truth could not be denied. The woman who once commanded respect with her fiery personality now felt exposed, so she avoided public events and paparazzi. She didn't want to deal with the stares, the whispers, and the incessant questions. Every time her phone buzzed, she prepared herself for another headline, another blog post that dissected her life. Jim was processing things differently, though, and instead of moping over the rumors, he buried himself in the studio. Music had always been his medicine, and now when everything was falling apart around him, it was his escape. However, even in the booth, he was rapping about betrayal, loyalty, and heartache instead of just the streets anymore.